Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all having a nice Saturday. Actually, it's afternoon. Um, we had a nice little Saturday. Today we've just kind of been hanging out. My mom kept the girls overnight because they have been driving their mother crazy. So they spent the night with my mom. So I just got to sleep in and drink coffee. And this afternoon we're getting a front porch picture taken. Have you guys heard about that? It's where photographers go around, stand 6 feet away, and take your picture on your front porch just as kind of a commemorative thing of what was going on in the world during this time. We are using J&J Photography, and what they're doing is they're just doing a free will donation, and then they're taking all of that money and providing different food and resources for the local hospitals and frontline people like nurses, doctors, and so forth. So it's kind of a cool concept. So I'm really excited. That is what we are going to be doing later today. But right now I figured I would just stop and make a quick video on chapter 15 since I actually had to do my hair and makeup for our pictures later today. So we are going to go over cognitive psychotherapy and mindfulness-based practices. So CBT, cognitive behavioral type therapy. So when we talk about cognition, what we're talking about are thoughts, belief patterns, interpretation, and assumptions we might have about something. So anytime we talk about cognitions, it's kind of a broad overview of a lot of different concepts. Like I said, thought, beliefs, interpretation, and assumptions. There are two different models that we typically look at. First is going to be that two-step model, which is actually a flawed model and we don't really use a whole lot. So for example, that means that things happen and those things directly influence our feelings. The truth, though, according to cognitive therapists, is that such a two-step model is flawed, especially since it's missing that important middle piece of how we interpret situations. So a better model to look at is that three-step model in which things happen, we interpret those things. So really, when we're talking about cognitive therapy, it's how we are interpreting those situations and then how those interpretations directly influence our feelings, our actions, and the way we respond in certain situations. So here just kind of shows you what the two-step model looks like versus that three-step model that incorporates that cognition piece. So how we interpret those events. Are we interpreting those events in a positive way? Are we interpreting them in a negative way? And then how are we responding based on that interpretation? So what can we do? So when we revise cognitions, we ensure that the thoughts a person has about a particular event rationally and logically corresponds to the event itself. We use a three-stage method. First, we need to identify automatic illogical cognitions. So what might be some miscognitions that we are having? Next, we challenge the logical cognitions. The objective is to cause clients to doubt the truth of their logical belief and to reach the conclusion that these beliefs should be revised. So that there is some misinterpretation somewhere and that we really need to revise and rethink how we are interpreting these situations. And then we need to replace it with logical cognitions. It can feel foreign since therapists are asking clients to think in the opposite way to which the client may have been thinking for many, many years. The cognitive therapist may therefore take the lead in the initial steps to revise the clinical thoughts. Beautiful, nice job, honey. My daughter came in to show me a picture, so I had to stop and look at that real quick. So when we revise our cognitions, one thing that we do need to be, once again, is we need to be culturally aware of how these thought processes, do they align with that person's culture? Do they not? Because if they do not align with that person's culture, it might be a hard shift for them to change the way that they're thinking. Or we don't want to impose our own cultural values on a client by encouraging them to think of something that might go against their own culture. So just be aware when we're talking about revising cognitions that you keep that person's culture in mind when we're revising them. And really, we use therapy as a teaching tool when we're talking about cognitive types of therapies. As a therapist, their function is to be the teacher, and they oftentimes are going to use a combination of mini lectures, handouts, and readings to explain the difference between a two-step and that preferred three-step model. So they'll talk to the person about how they are interpreting that situation and how they might more appropriately respond. And eventually the hope is that that person isn't going to need therapy anymore, that we can kind of change that illogical thought process and make it more of a positive thought process, and in return have better outcomes and behaviors because of it. You are typically going to have some homework when we're talking about cognitive therapy. Most of it is going to be done between sessions so that the therapist will give the person the homework, they'll work on it between sessions, and they'll come back and report about how well that homework went. Homework is often written. Clients are asked to keep a record of events, cognitions, feelings, and attempts to revise those cognitions to change the feelings regarding how they experienced that situation. And the homework is also behavioral. Clients are asked to perform certain behaviors before the next meeting, typically for the purpose of examining the validity of the illogical thought. So they'll have the person write down their thoughts, how they behaved, and then the therapist and the client will sit down together and look and see, was that a reasonable response? Is there a way we could have acted differently? What about the thought process? Was it a logical response? And so forth. So cognitive therapy, they typically go off of a brief, structured, focused approach. So factors contributing to efficiency of cognitive therapy is they're going to focus on the current problem. We're not going to spend a lot of time in the past. We're going to stay here in the current and look and see how we can solve the problem we're having right now. A purposeful, goal-oriented focus on clearly identifying symptoms, and they're going to be very structured therapy sessions. When we're talking about these types of therapy sessions, the cognitive therapist is going to set an agenda of which they're going to follow. Typically, each session is sequentially organized into segments, and sometimes each segment is allotted a specific amount of time. So for the next 10 minutes, we're going to talk about the logical thoughts you had over the past week. For the next 10 minutes, we're going to talk about your behavior and how you responded in those situations, and so forth. So here's just an example of what we might see in a structured cognitive therapy session. So first off, they might check on the client's mood or emotional status, set and confirm the agenda for the current session, establish a link to the previous session, often by reviewing previous homework assignments, progress through the body of the current session, proceeding step by step through the data or agenda, develop and assign new homework, and then summarize and talk about the past session and just see how the client is feeling about everything and if they need to make any tweaks anywhere. So one thing you are going to want to know for the test are the big players when we're talking about cognitive type therapy. So the first person you're obviously going to want to know is Albert Ellis. And he is big when we are talking about rational emotive behavior therapy, or earlier it was called rational emotive therapy, also known as RET or REBT. And what this does is it emphasizes a connection between rationality and emotion, and it also acknowledges that man is uniquely rational as well as uniquely irrational animal. And what this means is that man is a uniquely rational as well as a uniquely irrational animal, that his emotion or psychological disturbances are largely a result of his thinking illogically or irrationally, and that he can rid himself of most of his emotional or mental unhappiness, ineffectuality, and disturbance if he learns to maximize his rational and minimize his irrational thinking. So really what they're saying is, as a human being, we can get rid of those unhappiness feelings, those ineffective feelings, if we maximize our rational thinking and work on minimizing our irrational thinking. He does have an ABCDE model. You are going to want to know this model for the test. So A stands for activating event. Irrational beliefs are toxic because they function as a rigid, dogmatic demand that we apply to ourselves. Next is B, which stands for belief. Although strong preferences, irrational beliefs are not, in fact, must or absolute rules. C is going to be emotional consequence. We tend to couple these demands with overestimations of the consequences of failure, leading to a flawed logic in all these statements and opportunity for therapeutic benefit in correcting them. D is dispute. Ellis's model not only helps clients identify irrational beliefs that may interfere with with the events in their lives and their subsequent feelings, but it also urges clients to dispute those beliefs as well. The irrational belief is the target of the dispute. So how can we dispute this illogical belief? How can we make you realize that it is not a logical belief? And then E is going to be effective new belief. Regardless of the form of the dispute, it is effective. It affords the client the opportunity to replace the original irrational belief with an effective new belief that is more rational and leads to less troubling feelings. So this next slide here just kind of walks you through the different steps of the A, B, C, D, and E model of Albert Ellis. And it's about somebody studying for or thinking about the CPA exam. So I'll let you read that on your own when you get a chance. The next big person that we're going to talk about when we talk about cognitive therapy is going to be Aaron Beck. And he believed in the notion of cognitive triad. And he believed in the dysfunctional thought record, which is a brief description of the event or situation. He also talks about automatic thoughts about the event or situation, the emotion the person had, their adaptive response, and then the outcome. When we're talking about the cognitive triad in Aaron Beck, you're going to want to know that there are 3 particular cognitions: thought about themselves, thought about the external world, and thought about the future. All of these contribute to our mental health. So the way that we think about ourselves, the way we think about the external world and how it thinks about us, and the way we think about our future all impacts our mental health. So our anxiety, our depression, any other things such as that. So Aaron Beck often encouraged his clients to keep a dysfunctional thought record and used it as a way of organizing clients' experiences into columns on a written page. And what he'd have them do is write a brief description of the event or situation that they encountered, and then have them write automatic thoughts about that event or situation. So how did you feel about that event or situation? What were the emotions you were experiencing, and so forth. So Aaron Beck also often focused on common thought distortions. He believed that this was an essential step in cognitive therapy. And examples of common thought distortions are going to be all or nothing thinking, catastrophizing, personalization, overgeneralization, mental filtering, and mind reading. He often used, he also would use handouts or take-home readings for clients so that they could take them home, read through them, and also train the people special terms when they were examining their own thoughts so that they could keep stronger records of what they were experiencing during different situations and events. So when we're talking about all or nothing thinking, this is irrationally evaluating everything as either wonderful or terrible with no middle ground or gray area. So the way you might be feeling about this whole COVID-19 thing right now, some people are thinking, this is horrible. It's the worst thing ever. I hate being at home. I hate how this is changing my life. Some people might think, this is wonderful. I'm an introvert. There's nothing more I'd love than to be required to stay home all the time. Or you might be a middle ground. Yeah, there are some benefits. There are some nice things that are coming about because of COVID-19, but yet we also understand that there might be some negatives that are occurring as well. So are you always positive person, always negative person, or are you somewhere in the middle and have some gray area? Catastrophizing is going to be expecting the worst in the future when realistically it's unlikely to occur. So always expecting the worst outcome regardless of what the facts might be telling you otherwise. Magnification or minimizing is also going to be for negative events, making a mountain out of a molehill, or for positive events, playing down their importance. So let's say you get a big promotion and someone says, congratulations, and you're like, oh, it's nothing, it's not a big deal. That would be an example of playing down or minimizing their importance. Personalization is going to be assuming excessive personal responsibility for negative events. So just saying it's all my fault, even though there might be many other variables that contributed to that situation happening. Overgeneralization is going to be applying lessons learned from negative experiences more broadly than is warranted. Mental filtering is ignoring positive events while focusing solely on negative events, so not appreciating and taking in those positive moments in your lives. And then last but not least is going to be mind reading. And that is going to be presuming to know what others are thinking, critically or disapprovingly, when in fact, we don't know what other people are thinking. They might be thinking positively about us, but we are interpreting it as them thinking negatively about us just because we don't have a lot of self-confidence. So Aaron Beck beliefs as hypothesis. What he's stating is our beliefs are hypothesis. And what we need to do is test those beliefs to show that they are illogical. But the factor of the matter is sometimes it can backfire. When cognitive therapists encourage clients to test their hypothesis, they are careful to do so in a way that will effectively refute illogical thoughts. If they assign homework that confirms illogical thoughts, that is obviously going to backfire and just further cement those illogical thoughts the client is currently having. And like I said, make sure you know that Ellis and Beck are the two main ones we're talking about when we are referring to cognitive therapy. Next, we're going to move on to mindfulness, which we actually consider the third wave, which is going to be mindfulness and acceptance-based therapies. So when we talk about the definitions, mindfulness refers to being able to pay attention in the present moment to whatever arises internally or externally without becoming entangled or hooked by judging or wishing things were otherwise. So really what we talk about when we're talking about mindfulness is just being present in the moment and accepting that moment for what it's worth, whether it's a positive or negative thing, and not judging or wishing that it was a different type of situation. Mindfulness can also be described as an innate human capacity to deliberately pay full attention to where we are, to our actual experience, and to learn from this. This can be contrasted with living on an automatic pilot and going through our day-to-day without really being there. So when you're feeling negative emotions, just stopping and saying, why am I feeling negative emotions? What is going on in my current situation right now that might be contributing to that? Instead of just living on autopilot and going through the motions of our daily life. But if we want to talk about the short definition of mindfulness, there are three main components: awareness of the present experience with acceptance. So typically, you're going to need full engagement in a non-confrontational way. So mindfulness promotes full engagement with one's own internal mental processes in a non-confrontational way. Mindfulness-based therapies prefer to change people's relationships with their thoughts rather than the thoughts themselves. So instead of changing our thoughts like we are going to with cognitive therapy, it's going to be just changing our relationship with that thought. So acknowledging what that thought is and how it affects our behavior. And urge surfing is an approach to the treatment of addictive behaviors or any other behavior in which clients struggle with unwanted urges that encourages clients to relate differently to the urges than they have before. So acknowledging that urge and talking through it and hopefully not following through with it. So Stephen C. Hayes is a leading figure when we are talking about applications, when we're talking about acceptance and commitment therapy. According to Hayes and others, what is accepted in ACT is internal psychological experience, such as emotions, thoughts, and sensations. In this context, acceptance means facing with one's own internal fears. So looking at your own fears and kind of breaking them down and discovering why this is a fearful experience for you. How is it impacting your thoughts and how is it impacting your behaviors? FEAR is an acronym that they use that underlies psychological illness. And what this refers to is fusion, evaluation, avoidance, and reason giving. When we're talking about fusion, this is fusion with the inner experiences such as thoughts, feelings, and sensations that limits flexibility in responding. E is going to be evaluation of self, especially our own inner experiences. A is avoidance of unpleasant inner experiences by such means as distracting or numbing oneself. And R is reason giving or leaning too heavily on rationalizations that sound legitimate but actually perpetuate unhealthy approaches to life. So when we refer to act, we're accepting, choosing, and taking action. So we're accepting our own inner experience for what they are and nothing more. We're choosing directions in life based on one's core values, which will enhance life's meanings and purposes, and taking action in matters large and small that are consistent with our own values. So we accept our inner experiences for what they are. We choose directions that are focused on our core values, and then we take action. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because I do not really focus too much on this on the test. But when we are talking about dialectical behavior therapy, this was developed for people that have borderline personality disorder, and Marshall Linehan is the one that created this for that purpose. And really, when we're talking about borderline personality disorder, our biggest problem these clients face is emotional regulation. So in other words, across most aspects of their lives, individuals with borderline personality disorder struggle to control their intense feelings, and this therapy helps them control their feelings and kind of rein them in a little bit. And it breaks it down into 4 specific models of skills training, which is going to be emotional regulation, distress tolerance, interpersonal effectiveness, and mindfulness skills. And if you look through my notes on the bottom, it explains each of those ones a little further. So metacognitive therapy focuses on activating events, can be cognition rather than some external occurrences, and it includes 2 specific types of thoughts, positive and negative, and really they can both cause us problems at different points in time. Activating events can be a cognition itself rather than some external occurrences, and simply stated what that means is people can become depressed, anxious, or otherwise psychologically unwell because of their reactions to their own thoughts rather than their reactions to things that happen to them. So let's say you're a pessimist, you have low self-esteem, those thoughts that you are having about yourself or that you are interpreting how people perceive you can make you become depressed and anxious instead of a certain situation triggering those feelings of depression and anxiety. When we're talking about CAS, it's referred to as the cognitive attentional syndrome, is a term that describes a brooding, ruminative, problematic thinking style that can underlie many different psychological problems. So think about people that might have anxiety or depression. Oftentimes they might ruminate on things, they might have a difficult time moving past negative experiences they've had. Oftentimes they might have distorted types of thinking, and those would all fall under those cognitive attentional syndromes, CAS, that we're talking about here. So when I say that positive and negative symptoms can both cause problems, positive beliefs about worry may sound like this. Worrying helps me prepare for the future. If I don't worry, I could get blindsided by something. The last thing I want to do is stop worrying. So having that perception that worrying is a positive thing for them, when really it's probably not. And a negative belief pattern that would sound is, oh no, I have started worrying. Once I start worrying, I'm never able to stop. So we can either look at some of our behaviors as positive or negative, even though they both interfere with our daily functioning. When we look at how we apply metacognitive therapy, typically we're going to use it for anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive disorders, PTSD, GAD, which is generalized anxiety disorder, and schizophrenia. And I just mentioned all of that there. It can benefit the healing process and ultimately the prognosis of medical patients by looking at some of that distorted thinking. When we talk about cognitive therapy, it can also help for chronic headaches, chronic pain, PMS, sexual disorders, spinal cord injuries, and brain injuries. Schemotherapy is another one that can be used at times, and this is intended for clients who have borderline personality disorder or other long-standing complex clinical issues. Based on the idea that when young children experience poor parenting, they are likely to develop schemas or deep-seated cognitions about themselves and their relationships to others that match their experience but are maladaptive as they move forward in life. So they create these schemas or quick references that they can go to in their mind that probably do match the experience they had, but it is going to be maladaptive and probably doesn't meet every situation as they move forward in their life. And what they're going to do is they're going to pay attention to the roots of the problematic cognitions. So the key difference between schemotherapy and most other forms of cognitive therapy is that attention is paid to the roots of the problematic cognitions. In other words, the focus on early childhood and how it shaped those cognitions. So here we're going to be focusing more on the past maybe and how those roots and cognitions were developed instead of focusing on the present problem like we do focus on when we're talking about cognitive therapy in other situations. How well does it work? When we talk about cognitive therapy, it is strongly supported by empirical evidence. It is shown to have worked well for a wide types of disorders. Some of these include depression, anxiety, bulimia, PTSD, hypochondriasis, and numerous personality disorders. So really, cognitive therapy does work for a lot of different disorders. It is proven to work well. So it would be one that would be promoted in many different types of settings. And this is just saying that even mindfulness-based therapies have been shown to be effective in many different situations. So that was just a quick overview of Chapter 15, Cognitive Psychotherapy and Mindfulness-Based Therapies. We have 2 chapters left, Chapter 16, which is going to focus on group therapy, and Chapter 17, which is going to focus on children and adolescent types of disorders and therapies. So keep pushing forward, guys. We are almost there. If you have any questions, let me know. And I will create a discussion page for Chapter 15 and Chapter 16 in case you have any questions about this video or things that I did not touch on this video. So I hope you all have a good day, and I will catch up with you later. Thanks.